They looked down on her today, the quiet girl standing at the edge of the room, dressed too simply, spoken to too sharply, but they had no idea she was destined for greatness, and that destiny was already moving closer with every insult they threw her way. Her name was Elena, an overlooked assistant in a world that measured worth by power and polish. While the people laughing at her believed they were the ones who mattered, they saw weakness in her silence, poverty in her restraint, and insignificance in the way she never fought back. But what they couldn't see was the weight of something far bigger pressing quietly on her shoulders. Every glance that dismissed her, every word that cut her down, only pushed her further along a path they didn't know existed. They looked down on her today because they believed her future would look exactly like her present, small, limited, forgotten. But destiny doesn't announce itself, and greatness rarely arrives dressed the way people expect. So why did her hands steady when others trembled? Why did she watch powerful people the way someone studies a lesson she already knows? And what was it about this girl they looked down on today that made her feel temporary, while her destiny felt inevitable? Because when greatness is coming, it doesn't rush. It waits. And they were about to learn what they never thought to ask. The conference room at Harrington & Co. gleamed with polished walnut walls and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, the kind of room designed to remind people of their importance. Around the long table sat men and women in tailored suits, watches that cost more than most people's annual salaries, and expressions sharpened by years of winning quietly. They were decision makers, power holders, people used to being obeyed. And then there was Elena. She stood near the wall, holding a stack of printed reports, her shoes worn thin at the soles, her posture straight despite the weight of eyes pressing into her. She had learned long ago how to make herself smaller without shrinking inside. Are we starting, or are we waiting for another miracle? Melissa Grant said, not lifting her gaze from her tablet. Melissa was everything Elena was not allowed to appear to be: confident, polished, and publicly successful. She came from money, old money, the kind that quietly ensured internships turned into promotions. Her father's connections had opened doors before Melissa ever learned how to knock. Elena stepped forward calmly. The reports are ready. Melissa accepted them with 2 fingers, glancing briefly at Elena's blouse, her shoes, the absence of any designer label. A faint smile crossed her lips. Sometimes I forget, Melissa said lightly, that not everyone here grew up around standards. A few people chuckled, not because it was funny, but because laughing aligned them with power. Elena returned to her place against the wall, her fingers pressed together once, twice. A small, unconscious habit formed years ago at a long dining table far grander than this one, where mistakes were corrected gently but firmly. Think before you speak, a man's voice echoed in her memory. Silence is not weakness if you understand the game. Her father's voice. The presentation moved on. Numbers filled the screen. Projections, risks, future acquisitions. When a senior executive frowned at one slide, Elena noticed it before anyone else. This margin doesn't align with last quarter, he said. Melissa's head snapped up. She prepared it. Elena met his eyes. The adjustment accounts for supplier delays tied to port labor negotiations, she said softly. They haven't been announced yet. The room stilled. How would you know that? Someone asked. Elena hesitated, just a fraction too long. Patterns, she said simply. Melissa laughed, breaking the tension. Well, even guesses land sometimes. The room relaxed again. Elena lowered her gaze, but beneath her blouse, the thin chain around her neck shifted. The small ring hidden there pressed against her skin, cool, familiar, heavy with meaning. She didn't touch it. Not yet. Because the people in this room believed they were looking down on her today, and none of them knew how temporary that view really was. Elena's apartment was quiet in the way only forgotten places were. One window faced a brick wall, the other a narrow slice of sky that turned amber at sunset. The furniture didn't match: a second-hand sofa, a small dining table with one chair slightly shorter than the others, but everything was meticulously clean, arranged with intention rather than comfort. She set her bag down and leaned her forehead briefly against the door, letting the silence wash over her. Just one more day, she whispered to no one. She slipped off her shoes, winced at the ache in her feet, then moved toward the small kitchenette. As the kettle heated, her hand drifted unconsciously to the chain beneath her blouse. This time, she didn't stop herself. She pulled the ring free. It was simple, unassuming, not the kind of jewelry anyone would steal. But the inside was engraved, the letters worn smooth by years of touch. She traced them with her thumb the way she always did when the day became too heavy. The sight of it opened a door she usually kept shut. She was 12 again, sitting at the long dining table in a sunlit estate, papers spread neatly in front of her. Her father stood behind her, tall and composed, correcting her calculations with a patient finger. Again, he'd said calmly, "Not until you understand why the answer works." "I already do," young Elena replied, frustrated. He smiled faintly. "Understanding isn't proving. You'll need both." The memory shifted. A teenage Elena stood in a quiet charity clinic overseas, watching her father greet staff by name, listening more than he spoke. Later, in the car, she'd asked why he never told people who he was. "Because respect given too early teaches nothing," he'd answered. "One day, you'll need to know who values you without knowing your worth." The kettle whistled, pulling her back to the present. Elena poured the water slowly, her hands steady. They always were, even now. Even when her phone vibrated on the counter. Unknown number. She stared at it longer than she should have. Finally, she answered. "Hello. You shouldn't still be there," a man's voice said, low and controlled. Not unkind. Not warm either. Her shoulders stiffened. "I'm where I need to be." A pause. "Time disagrees with you." "I know," Elena replied. "You always say that," the man said. "Your father used to as well." Her breath caught, just enough to notice. 30 days, he continued. "After that, the board can no longer justify delay." "I didn't ask for delay," she said. "No," he agreed. "You asked for proof." The line went dead. Elena sat down slowly, the ring clenched in her fist. Across the city, in a high-rise apartment lit by soft recessed lights, Melissa Grant stared at her reflection in the mirror, replaying the meeting in her head. The way the room had gone quiet. The way Elena had answered without hesitation. Patterns, Melissa muttered. Something about it bothered her. Not the intelligence, but the confidence behind it. The kind that didn't beg for approval. She poured herself a drink, then hesitated, untouched glass trembling slightly in her hand. "Who are you?" she whispered, though she already felt the answer wouldn't be simple. Back in her apartment. Elena slipped the ring back beneath her blouse. She lay down without turning on the lights, staring at the ceiling. They still looked down on her today. But somewhere beneath the weight of silence, the countdown had begun. Morning came quietly, slipping into Elena's apartment without ceremony. She woke before the alarm, as she always did, staring at the pale light on the ceiling while the echo of the previous night's call still lingered in her chest. 30 days wasn't a threat. It was a boundary, one she had known was coming, even if she'd hoped it might arrive later. She dressed carefully, choosing the same muted colors that allowed her to blend in. As she fastened her blouse, the chain around her neck caught briefly on the fabric, and for a moment she considered taking it off entirely. She didn't. She never did. Some weight, she'd learned, wasn't meant to be removed, only carried. On the bus ride to work, she watched the city pass by with practiced detachment. A billboard flashed the face of a business tycoon she recognized instantly. Others on the bus murmured about wealth, about luck, about how some people were born chosen. Elena looked away before anyone could notice the flicker of recognition in her eyes. The image dragged her into another memory, sharper this time. She was 17, standing in a sterile hospital corridor that smelled of disinfectant and grief. Her phone buzzed in her hand, unread messages piling up as she stared at the closed doors ahead. A man in a dark suit approached, his voice low, professional. "I'm sorry, Miss Carter," he'd said. There were no survivors. The world had gone quiet after that. No dramatic collapse. No screaming. Just silence, thick and suffocating. The funeral came days later. Cameras lingered at the gates, strangers offering condolences they didn't mean. Elena stood beside men who spoke of responsibility and protection while their eyes measured assets, not loss. She remembered the feel of her father's ring being slipped from her finger that night, replaced with promises wrapped in legal language she hadn't yet learned to distrust. At Harrington & Co., the office buzzed with its usual hum. Elena took her seat just as Melissa walked in, heels clicking sharply against the floor. "Morning," Melissa said, stopping by Elena's desk. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Quick question. Where did you learn to read balance sheets like that?" Elena looked up. "I learned by watching." Melissa tilted her head. "Funny. Most people like you don't get that kind of exposure. People like you." Elena smiled politely. "Most people don't realize how much is happening when they aren't paying attention." Melissa laughed softly, but her fingers tightened around her coffee cup. "Careful," she said. "Confidence can be mistaken for ambition." Elena watched her walk away, the words settling heavily. Ambition had once been expected of her. trained into her, then punished out of her. Later that afternoon, a sealed envelope appeared on Elena's desk. No name, no return address. Inside was a single document, a copy of a trust agreement she hadn't seen in years. Her breath caught. At the bottom, one clause was highlighted: beneficiary must demonstrate independent judgment, resilience under pressure, and discretion when underestimated. Elena folded the paper carefully, her pulse steady despite the storm building beneath her calm exterior. Across the office, Melissa glanced over, sensing something shift, like the air before a storm breaks. Elena met her gaze briefly. For the first time, she didn't look away. The shift didn't announce itself loudly. It never did. It arrived in small disturbances. A meeting Elena wasn't invited to, files moved from her shared drive, conversations that stopped when she walked past. Power, she had learned, preferred quiet pressure to open force. By midday, the office hummed with urgency. A senior partner had returned unexpectedly, and whispers of an internal review rippled through the floor like a low current. Elena was organizing contracts when Melissa appeared at her desk again, this time with Daniel Whitmore in tow. Daniel was old money wrapped in effortless charm. His grandfather's portrait still hung in one of the firm's hallways. He never raised his voice because he had never needed to. Elena, Daniel said pleasantly, Melissa tells me you've been helpful lately. I do my job, Elena replied. That's exactly the problem, Melissa cut in lightly. She tends to do more than what's asked, sometimes without understanding the consequences. Daniel studied Elena more closely now. Is that so? Elena met his gaze, calm. Understanding consequences is part of my job too. A beat passed. Daniel smiled. Good. Then you won't mind helping us with something delicate. He slid a thin folder across her desk. We need these projections finalized by tomorrow morning, Melissa said. But there's a catch. Daniel continued smoothly. Some numbers will need to align temporarily. It's nothing unusual. Elena opened the folder. She saw it immediately, the subtle manipulation, the short-term illusion of strength at the expense of long-term damage. The kind of decision that protected reputations while burying accountability. This isn't accurate, Elena said quietly. Melissa's smile thinned. Accuracy is flexible when timing matters. Elena closed the folder. Her hands didn't shake, but something inside her tightened, a familiar tension from years ago, when she'd learned how easily truth could be bent by those who believed they owned it. A memory surfaced uninvited. Her father stood in his study, reviewing documents late at night. Young Elena had asked why he never cut corners when others did. Because shortcuts always cost more later, he'd said without looking up. You just don't see the bill right away. Back in the office, Daniel leaned closer. This isn't a test of morality, Elena. It's a test of loyalty. She looked up at him then, really looked, and saw not confidence, but fear. Fear of exposure. Fear of losing control. I'll need time, Elena said. Melissa scoffed. You have until morning. That evening, Elena stayed late, the office emptying around her. The city lights blinked on one by one outside the windows as she studied the numbers again, tracing consequences others ignored. Her phone buzzed. And no number. You've been given a choice, the voice said when she answered. I know, Elena replied. Most people choose safety. She glanced at the folder, then at the reflection of herself in the darkened glass, small, underestimated, watching. My father didn't raise me to be most people, she said. Silence lingered on the line. That, the voice finally said, is exactly why this matters. The call ended. Elena sat back, exhaling slowly. Across town, Melissa stared at her laptop, refreshing an email that hadn't arrived yet. Her confidence was thinning, replaced by irritation. She couldn't name. Don't disappoint me, she muttered. Elena looked once more at the altered projections, then began correcting them. Quietly, precisely, and without asking permission. The fallout didn't come immediately. That was the cruel part. Elena submitted the corrected projections just before dawn, attaching a brief note that explained nothing and apologized for nothing. She left the office while the city was still half asleep, the air cool against her face as if it were trying to warn her that calm never lasted long after truth was introduced. By mid-morning, the building buzzed with tension sharp enough to taste. Doors closed, voices lowered, assistants were sent away. Elena was called into the conference room alone. Daniel sat at the head of the table, jacket off, sleeves rolled up. Melissa stood near the window, arms crossed, jaw set so tightly it looked painful. Sit, Daniel said. Elena did. You changed the numbers, Melissa snapped. I corrected them, Elena replied evenly. Daniel rubbed his temple. Do you understand what you've done? Yes. Then explain why, Melissa demanded. Elena folded her hands on the table. Because the delay you're hiding will surface within 2 quarters. Because when it does, this firm will be investigated. And because the people who suffer won't be you. The room went still. Daniel leaned back slowly, studying her the way one examines a locked door after realizing the key doesn't work. You could have warned us, he said. I did, Elena answered. Yesterday. Melissa laughed bitterly. You think you're some kind of savior? No, Elena said softly. I think I'm responsible. That word landed harder than anything else. Responsibility. It echoed backward through Elena's life, dragging another memory with it, the day after the funeral, when her guardians had gathered her into a quiet room. Voices gentle, hands firm. This is for your own good, they'd said as documents slid across the table. You're too young to carry this kind of burden. She'd signed because she didn't yet know that protection could look like erasure. Back in the present, Daniel exhaled. You realize this puts us all at risk. Elena met his gaze. Only if the truth is dangerous. For a moment, Daniel said nothing. Then he smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, but with something closer to calculation. You're either very brave, he said, or very stupid. Elena didn't answer, because bravery and stupidity had once been framed to her as the same thing, right before everything she loved was taken. You're suspended, Melissa said abruptly. Effective immediately. Daniel raised a hand. Paid, he added after a pause. Melissa shot him a look. Why? Because, Daniel said slowly, eyes never leaving Elena. I want to see what she does next. Elena stood, gathering her things. At the door, she paused. This firm will be fine, she said quietly. If it chooses to be. Outside, the elevator ride felt longer than usual. When the doors opened to the lobby, her phone buzzed again. A known number. You did exactly what you were supposed to do, the voice said. Elena closed her eyes briefly. Then why does it feel like I just stepped off a cliff? Because, the man replied, the ground is about to rise to meet you. Across the city. Melissa sat alone in the conference room, staring at the empty chair Elena had occupied. For the first time, doubt crept in. And doubt, once invited, never leaves quietly. The suspension gave Elena something she hadn't had in years. She didn't go home. Instead, she walked, past storefronts she never entered, past cafes filled with people who looked unafraid of their futures. The city moved around her, indifferent, alive. It always had been. Her feet carried her somewhere she hadn't planned to go. The cemetery was quiet, trimmed, respectable, the kind of place where grief was expected to be neat and contained. Elena stopped in front of a familiar headstone, the letters carved deep and precise. Thomas Carter. She stood there longer than she intended, the silence pressing into her chest. She hadn't come often. Not because she didn't miss him, but because this place asked questions she never felt ready to answer. I did what you taught me, she said quietly. I don't know if you'd call it wise. The wind stirred the leaves around her, and memory took over. She was younger again, sitting on the edge of her father's desk while he spoke on the phone in clipped, careful tones. He'd ended the call, rubbed his face, then noticed her watching. People will always test what they think they can take from you, he'd told her. What matters is what you refuse to give. She hadn't understood then. She understood now. After his death, the world had closed in fast. Lawyers, trustees, guardians who spoke gently while dismantling her life piece by piece. The estate sold, accounts frozen, her name reduced to a line item guarded by clauses and conditions. She'd been given to choices without realizing it. Disappear quietly, or fight loudly. She had chosen the third option, endure. Elena reached into her bag and pulled out the folded trust document. She read the highlighted clause again, though she knew it by heart now. Independent judgment, resilience under pressure, discretion when underestimated. They hadn't wanted her to fail. They'd wanted to see who she became without protection. Her phone vibrated. This time, the name displayed wasn't unknown. Mr. Hale. You shouldn't be alone today, he said when she answered. I'm not, Elena replied, eyes on the headstone. A pause. You were never meant to stay small for this long. I wasn't meant to be rushed either. Hale exhaled slowly. They're watching the firm closely now. Whitmore especially. Good, Elena said. He should be. And Melissa? Elena's mouth tightened slightly. She's afraid. That makes her dangerous. Only if she feels cornered. Silence stretched between them. You've done enough, Hale said finally. If you want out, The board will approve immediate transition. Elena closed her eyes. She saw herself at 17, standing in black clothes that didn't feel like her own, listening to people promise to take care of her future. They all meant it. None of them meant her. No, Elena said. Not yet. Then prepare, Hale replied. Because when you step forward, there will be no hiding again. The call ended. Elena slipped the phone back into her bag and rested her hand briefly against the cold stone. They still look down on me today, she murmured. But not for much longer. She walked away without looking back. And somewhere far above her, in rooms she had once been trained to command, the balance began to shift. The announcement didn't come with fanfare. No press release. No celebration. It arrived as a single line buried in an internal memo, forwarded too quickly for anyone to stop it. The firm will host a closed-door review with its principal investor. That was all. But in offices built on rumor, one line was enough. Whispers spread. Names were guessed. Old alliances reawakened. People straightened their posture, polished their tone. Rehearsed versions of themselves meant to impress someone they didn't yet know. Elena read the memo on her phone while sitting at her kitchen table, sunlight pooling across the wood. Her name wasn't mentioned. It didn't need to be. Her phone rang minutes later. This is not coincidence, Hale said without greeting. I know, Elena replied. They've requested access to internal performance data, independently verified. Elena's gaze drifted to the trust documents still folded beside her mug. And someone suggested you compiled the most accurate projections we've seen in years. A faint smile touched her lips, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. I was suspended, she said. Yes, Hale replied. Which means you're not officially involved. She understood immediately. That makes me invisible, Elena said. And unaccountable, Hale added. The safest place to observe. Across town, Melissa stood in her office, staring at the same memo on her screen. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, unmoving. A principal investor. One with the power to erase reputations or resurrect them. Daniel Whitmore leaned against her doorway, expression unreadable. You look tense. I don't like surprises, Melissa replied. Neither do I, Daniel said. Especially ones with money. Melissa turned to him sharply. Who is it? Daniel shook his head. Whoever they are, they're quiet. Which means they've been watching longer than we realize. Her eyes flickered, just briefly, to Elena's empty desk, back in her apartment. Elena dressed carefully again, not in business attire, but something neutral, forgettable. The chain remained hidden beneath her blouse. As she prepared to leave, her phone buzzed once more. And no number. You'll receive a temporary access badge today, the voice said. No name attached. Will they recognize me? Elena asked. They won't think to, the man replied. That's the point. The firm buzzed with controlled chaos by the time Elena arrived. Security barely glanced at her badge. Familiar faces passed without recognition, or chose not to recognize her. In the boardroom, Melissa arranged documents with manic precision. Daniel spoke in hushed tones to a senior partner, his usual confidence hedged with something brittle. When the doors finally closed, the room settled into tense expectation. An empty chair sat at the far end of the table. Waiting. Elena took a seat along the wall, unnoticed, her eyes calm as she surveyed the room. The same room that had once trained her to stand tall without revealing her height. Her father's voice surfaced again. Steady and unyielding. When the time comes, don't announce yourself. Let the truth enter first. Elena folded her hands and waited. Because the people who looked down on her today were about to face a future they could no longer control. The room fell silent the moment the investor's representative began to speak. He wasn't imposing, no tailored bravado, no exaggerated authority. Just a man in a dark suit with a thin tablet and eyes that missed nothing. We'll begin with operational integrity, he said calmly. Then leadership decisions. Daniel straightened. Melissa lifted her chin. Elena remained still. The representative tapped the screen, and numbers appeared on the wall display. Clean, accurate, uncomfortable. These projections, he continued, are not the ones submitted for executive approval last quarter. Melissa's smile tightened. Markets change. Truth doesn't, the man replied without malice. A ripple moved through the room. These figures, he added, were prepared by someone with access to internal data but no incentive to protect personal reputation. His eyes flicked, briefly, toward Elena. So brief that no one else noticed. Daniel cleared his throat. Are you suggesting misconduct? I'm suggesting correction, the man said. And that someone here chose honesty over convenience. Melissa's nails dug into her palm. The screen shifted again, emails, timestamps, revision histories. The alterations were subtle, but damning. The room seemed to shrink around them. Who prepared the original corrections? Daniel asked. The representative paused, then said evenly, that information is confidential. Ilona felt the weight of the moment press against her ribs. This was the edge, the place her father had warned her about, where silence and speech both carried consequences. Melissa laughed sharply. This is absurd. We're being audited by ghosts now. The representative turned to her. Fear often speaks first when accountability arrives. Silence. Ilona's phone vibrated once in her pocket. A known number. Now. She stood. Not dramatically. Not defiantly. Just enough to be seen. I prepared them, she said. Every head turned. Daniel stared. You were suspended. Yes, Ilona replied. Which is why I could afford to be accurate. The representative inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her without naming her. Melissa's voice shook. This isn't your place. Ilona met her gaze. Neither is deception. The room buzzed with overlapping voices, questions, objections, defenses. The representative raised a hand. Enough. He looked at Ilona again, longer this time. Our principal investor values restraint, he said. And memory. Double quotes memory. The word echoed. Not for the room, but for Ilona alone, her father's steady. The late nights. The lessons that never raised their voice but never failed to leave a mark. Daniel exhaled slowly. So what happens now? The representative shut down the display. Now, he said, we decide who understands stewardship, and who confuses power with ownership. He gathered his tablet and moved toward the door, then paused. This review isn't finished, he added. And neither is she. The door closed behind him. The room erupted. Ilona remained standing, heart steady, pulse calm. They were looking at her now. Not down, but not yet understanding how high she stood. The room never fully recovered its balance after the door closed. Voices overlapped, then faded into uneasy silence as the reality settled in. The review hadn't ended, it had only begun. People shifted in their seats, suddenly aware of how much they had said, how much they had hidden, and how little they actually knew. Daniel Whitmore broke the quiet. We need clarity, he said, measured but strained. If this investor values restraint and memory, then we deserve to know who's being trusted. Melissa laughed too quickly. You're letting an assistant hijack a boardroom. Ilona didn't respond. She didn't need to. She felt it before it happened, the subtle shift in air. The instinct that had once warned her when negotiations were turning. When silence had stretched long enough to become dangerous. The door opened again. This time, it wasn't the representative. It was Mr. Hale. He walked in without hurry, dressed simply, carrying no documents, no badge, no visible authority, and yet the room reacted to him immediately. Chairs straightened. Daniel's posture stiffened. Melissa's face drained of color as recognition hit her too late. Hale nodded politely to the room, then turned to Ilona. You've done well, he said, not softly, not loudly, but with the familiarity of someone who had watched her grow into her spine. Daniel stood abruptly. Mr. Hale, I wasn't informed. No, Hale replied calmly. You weren't. Melissa found her voice again, brittle. What is this? Hala's eyes finally swept the room. This is the conclusion of an evaluation that began many years ago. He turned back to Ilona. Would you like to continue standing, he asked her, or would you prefer your seat? Ilona didn't hesitate. She walked to the empty chair at the far end of the table, the one no one had claimed, the one that had waited. As she sat, something inside the room seemed to click into place, like a final piece sliding home. Hale spoke again. Ilona Carter is not an assistant under review, he said. She is the sole beneficiary of the Carter Trust, majority stakeholder in Harrington & Co. Through Carter Holdings. The words landed without drama. They didn't need any. Melissa's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Daniel stared at Ilona as if seeing her for the first time, truly, seeing her, and realizing how many signals he had dismissed as coincidence. The ring, the composure. The refusal to protect ego over truth. All of it snapped into alignment. Ilona folded her hands on the table. I didn't hide who I was, she said calmly. I just didn't announce it. Hale continued. Her father believed leadership should be tested without armor. Ilona agreed. Melissa found her breath at last. This is some kind of game. Ilona met her eyes, not with triumph, not with anger, but with quiet clarity. No, she said. It's accountability. The room was silent again, but this silence was different. This one understood. They had looked down on her today, and now they knew, with sickening certainty, that they always had. No one spoke for several seconds after the truth settled into the room. It wasn't shock anymore. It was recalibration, the quiet, painful process of realizing the ground beneath you has always been higher than you thought, and you were standing on the wrong side of it. Elena looked around the table slowly. These were the same faces that had dismissed her, corrected her tone, joked about her restraint. Now they watched her with careful attention, measuring every breath as if it suddenly mattered, because now it did. Hale remained standing beside her, but he no longer spoke for her. He didn't need to. Elena straightened slightly. Not to assert dominance, she had never needed that, but to speak clearly. My father believed power should answer to responsibility, she said. Not the other way around. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. It carried. He also believed that character reveals itself best when no one thinks you're watching. Daniel swallowed. So this was a test. Elena met his eyes. It was a choice. Every day, Melissa sat rigid, hands clenched so tightly her knuckles had gone white. You let us humiliate you. Elena turned to her, expression unreadable. No, she said gently. I let you show me who you were. That landed harder than any accusation. Hale finally spoke again. The board will be restructured. Effective immediately. Names were mentioned. Decisions made. Authority reassigned. Daniel listened in silence, the weight of legacy slipping from his shoulders inch by inch. Melissa didn't interrupt. She couldn't. Her power had always depended on performance without scrutiny, and scrutiny had arrived. When it was over, chairs scraped back slowly. People avoided Elena's eyes, not out of fear, but out of something closer to shame. One by one, they left. Soon. Only Elena and Hale remained. You could have revealed yourself years ago, Hale said quietly. Yes, Elena replied. Why didn't you? She stood, fingers brushing the edge of the table that had once felt so far above her reach. Because greatness that hasn't been tested is just entitlement, she said. And I didn't want to inherit something I hadn't earned. Hale nodded once. Your father would have said the same. Later, as Elena stepped out of the building, the city looked unchanged, same streets, same lights, same noise, but it felt different. Lighter. She paused at the entrance, removing the chain from beneath her blouse at last. The ring caught the light, no longer hidden, no longer heavy. People passed her without knowing what had just shifted. And that was fine, because the girl they looked down on today, she hadn't risen to greatness by proving them wrong. She had risen by becoming exactly who she was always meant to be, quietly, deliberately, and without asking permission. And tomorrow, when they spoke her name, they would do so carefully, not because she demanded it, but because they finally understood what they had been standing beneath all along.